Year 2387. Aboard the battleship Iron Resolve patrolling the outer rim of human space, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of humanity's most advanced warship, watching the stars drift past. The Iron Resolve was part of the Deathworld Legion, an elite force of humans who had volunteered to leave Earth behind and establish colonies on the galaxy's most dangerous planets. These worlds had forged them into something beyond ordinary human capabilities. The bridge crew worked in practiced silence. Lieutenant Emma Brooks monitored communications while Sergeant Tom Hayes oversaw tactical systems. These weren't just soldiers, they were survivors of worlds that killed most species within hours. "Captain," Emma's voice cut through the quiet. "Receiving emergency transmission from Earth." Morrison turned sharply. Earth rarely contacted the Legion. The home planet had grown soft, relying on diplomatic solutions and peaceful trade. They viewed the Legion as necessary but barbaric. "Put it through." The holographic display flickered to life, showing Admiral Kate Walsh from Earth Defense Command. Her usual composed demeanor was gone, replaced by barely controlled panic. "Captain Morrison, Earth needs immediate assistance. We're under attack by the Void Hunters." Morrison's blood ran cold. The Void Hunters were legendary, an ancient species that consumed entire worlds, leaving nothing but empty space. Most civilizations considered them myth. "Admiral, with respect, the Void Hunters' heir." "Real," Walsh interrupted. "3 of their harvester ships appeared in our system 6 hours ago. They've already begun consuming Mars. Our entire fleet engaged them." And her voice cracked. "We lost everything. 47 ships destroyed in minutes." The bridge fell silent. Earth's fleet was massive, equipped with the galaxy's most sophisticated technology. If they couldn't scratch the Void Hunters, what could the Legion do? "They're using some kind of energy drain weapon," Walsh continued. "It feeds on our ship's power cores, growing stronger with each vessel destroyed. Conventional weapons are useless." Morrison studied the tactical data streaming across his screen. The Void Hunters' ships were massive, each one the size of a small moon. Their hulls seemed to absorb energy rather than deflect it. "Admiral, you know the Legion's reputation. Earth Command has made it clear we're not welcome in civilized space." Walsh's composure finally broke. "Jake, they're heading for Earth. 2 billion people are about to die. I don't care about politics anymore." Morrison looked at his crew. These men and women had been forged in the fires of hell worlds. They'd fought creatures that existed only in nightmares, survived on planets where the very air was toxic. Earth had cast them out, called them monsters. "Tom, signal the fleet. All Legion ships are to converge on Earth immediately." "Sir," Hayes responded. "That's 12,000 ships and 2 million personnel." "Are you sure?" Morrison nodded grimly. "Emma, open a channel to all Legion commanders." The holographic display expanded, showing dozens of weathered faces, captains who had led their people through impossible odds. These were the commanders of humanity's outcasts. "Brothers and sisters," Morrison began, "Earth is calling. The same Earth that exiled us, that called us too dangerous for civilized society. The Void Hunters have come, and they're about to harvest our homeworld." Captain Lisa Reed from the Stormcaller spoke first. "Jake, they made their choice. Why should we die for people who fear us?" "Because they're still human," Morrison replied. "And because if Earth falls, the Void Hunters won't stop there. They'll consume every human world until nothing remains." The silence stretched. These were people who had seen their families die on impossible worlds, who had been abandoned by the very civilization they once served. Finally, Captain Mike Torres from the Death's Edge nodded. "The Legion answers. All ships set course for Earth." One by one, the other commanders agreed. 12,000 ships began changing course, their crews preparing for what might be their final battle. As the transmission ended, Morrison turned to his tactical officer. "Tom, what's our ETA to Earth?" 72 hours at maximum burn, sir." Morrison stared at the star map. Earth had 6 days before the Void Hunters reached it. The Legion would arrive with less than 4 days to spare. Emma, send a message to Admiral Walsh. Tell her the Legion is coming. Tell her to evacuate as many civilians as possible to the outer colonies. As the Iron Resolve jumped to hyperspace, Morrison wondered if they were racing toward salvation or simply choosing where humanity would make its last stand. The gathering storm. The Legion fleet materialized at the edge of Earth's solar system like a swarm of metallic predators. 12,000 ships of every class, from nimble fighters to massive dreadnoughts, all bearing the scars of countless battles on worlds that would kill most species within hours. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the Iron Resolve, watching the tactical display populate with friendly contacts. Each ship represented survivors who had chosen exile over comfort, who had been forged in the crucibles of the galaxy's most hostile environments. Fleet Status Report, Morrison commanded. Lieutenant Brooks consulted her displays. All Legion vessels accounted for, sir. 2.3 million personnel ready for combat. Admiral Walsh is requesting immediate conference. The holographic projector activated, revealing not just Admiral Walsh, but the entire surviving Earth Defense Council. Their faces showed the strain of the past 3 days. Hollow eyes, trembling hands, the look of people who had watched their world begin to die. Captain Morrison, Walsh began, the situation has deteriorated. The Void Hunters have consumed Mars completely. Jupiter's moons are gone. They're systematically harvesting everything in their path toward Earth. Morrison studied the tactical readout. The 3 Void Hunter vessels moved like living things, their massive forms pulsing with absorbed energy. Each ship was surrounded by a cloud of smaller craft, harvester drones that stripped matter at the molecular level. What about evacuation? Morrison asked. We've managed to relocate 400 million people to the outer colonies, replied General Alex Carter, Earth's military commander. But the transport ships can't approach Earth anymore. The Void Hunters are draining power from anything that gets too close. Captain Reed's voice crackled over the communication system from her ship. Jake, I'm reading the energy signatures. These things are like living black holes. They're not just consuming matter. They're feeding on the fundamental forces that hold atoms together. Morrison nodded grimly. The Legion had encountered similar entities before, though never on this scale. On the Deathworld of Cross-7, they'd fought energy parasites that fed on nuclear reactors. The solution had been brutal but effective. Tom, Morrison addressed his tactical officer, compile everything we know about energy-draining entities. Cross-reference with Legion combat records from the past 50 years. Surgeon Hayes worked quickly, his fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. Sir, 17 different encounters with energy absorption entities. Most successful engagements involved overwhelming them with more energy than they could process. Or, interrupted Captain Torres from the Death's Edge, starving them completely. Remember the Void Wraiths on Titan Prime? We beat them by cutting all power and fighting with kinetic weapons. Morrison considered both options. The Legion fleet carried experimental weapons designed for Deathworld combat. Railguns that fired depleted uranium slugs, fusion bombs that could crack small moons, and something even more dangerous. Emma, get me Commander Sarah Blake from the Prometheus. The holographic display shifted to show a woman whose face was marked by radiation burns, souvenirs from her time on the atomic wasteland of Radworld. Commander Blake oversaw the Legion's most classified project. Jake, Blake said without preamble, I know what you're thinking. The entropy cannons aren't ready for field deployment. How not ready? Morrison asked. They have a 15% chance of tearing holes in spacetime. But against energy-draining entities, she paused, considering. They might be exactly what we need. Admiral Walsh leaned forward. What are entropy cannons? Morrison exchanged glances with his officers. Earth Command had always been kept in the dark about the Legion's more extreme weapons development. They're weapons that accelerate entropy, Morrison explained. They age targets at an accelerated rate, causing molecular breakdown. We developed them for fighting crystalline entities on time-dilated worlds. The risk, Blake continued, is that if the weapons overload, they could create localized time storms, potentially catastrophic. The Earth Defense Council looked horrified. General Carter spoke up. You're talking about weapons that could destroy reality itself. Welcome to Deathworld combat, Captain Reed said dryly. When you're fighting things that shouldn't exist, you need weapons that break the rules of physics. Morrison made his decision. Blake, prepare 6 entropy cannons for deployment. We'll mount them on our heaviest dreadnoughts. Sir, Admiral Walsh protested. Surely there's a less dangerous approach. Morrison turned to face her directly. Admiral, in the past 72 hours, these entities have consumed an entire planet and 4 moons. They're not following conventional physics, so we can't fight them with conventional weapons. The tactical display updated, showing the Void Hunters had passed Jupiter's orbit. Earth had less than 18 hours. All ships, Morrison announced to the fleet, prepare for Operation Deathworld. We're going to show these entities why humans earned the right to call themselves Legion. The impossible battle. The Void Hunters emerged from the asteroid belt like nightmares given form. Each ship stretched 30 kilometers in length, their surfaces rippling with absorbed energy from the worlds they had consumed. Swarms of harvester drones surrounded them like metallic locusts, already beginning to strip minerals from the outer asteroid fields. Captain Morrison watched from the bridge of the Iron Resolve as his fleet took formation. The Legion had faced impossible odds before, but never against entities that seemed to bend the laws of physics simply by existing. Enemy vessels are reading our approach, Lieutenant Brooks reported. They're laughing. Morrison frowned. Laughing? The energy signatures are fluctuating in patterns that match neural activity associated with amusement. They think we're insignificant. Captain Reed's voice crackled over the communication system. Jake, my sensors are detecting something else. The lead ship has organic components. These aren't just machines. They're alive. The tactical display updated as the Legion's advanced scanners penetrated the Void Hunters' energy fields. What they revealed was disturbing. The ships weren't constructed but grown, their hulls composed of some unknown biometallic substance that pulsed with dark energy. Commander Blake, Morrison called to the Prometheus. Status on the entropy cannons. Charged and ready, but Jake, I'm detecting temporal distortions around the enemy ships. They're not just consuming matter and energy. They're consuming time itself. Morrison felt a chill. Time manipulation was theoretical for most species, but the Legion had encountered it on the chromium mines of Temporal 7. Entire battles had been fought in seconds that lasted years. All ships engage at maximum range. Do not allow them to get close enough to drain our power cores. The Legion fleet opened fire with everything they had. Plasma cannons, quantum torpedoes, and kinetic railguns unleashed a barrage that would have vaporized most fleets. The space between the forces lit up like a miniature star. The Void Hunters absorbed it all. Energy readings are off the charts, Sergeant Hayes reported. They're not just surviving our attacks, they're getting stronger. The lead Void Hunter ship pulsed with new energy and fired back. But instead of conventional weapons, it unleashed something far worse. A wave of entropy that aged everything it touched. Legion ships in the wave's path began to rust and decay, their hulls crumbling as decades of wear compressed into seconds. Evasive maneuvers, Morrison shouted, but it was too late for the outer wing. 12 ships simply fell apart, their crews aging to dust in moments. Captain Torres from the Death's Edge broke radio silence. Jake, conventional weapons are useless. We need to try something insane. Morrison knew what he meant. The Legion had developed tactics on Deathworlds that would horrify civilized military commanders. Sometimes survival required abandoning sanity. All ships, execute Protocol Omega. Ram them. The Earth Defense Council's horrified voices filled the communication channel. Captain Morrison, that's suicide. Admiral Walsh protested. No, Morrison replied grimly. It's Deathworld logic. Emma, route all power to forward shields and engines. Tom, arm the self-destruct charges. The Legion fleet reformed into a massive spear formation, each ship pushing its engines beyond safe limits. They accelerated toward the Void Hunters at speeds that would have torn apart normal vessels. But the Legion ships weren't normal. They'd been built to survive atmospheric entry on worlds where the air itself was corrosive. Their hulls were layered with materials that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. The Void Hunters seemed confused by this tactic. Their energy-draining fields flickered as they tried to process the approaching threat. Blake, fire the entropy cannons now. 6 beams of pure temporal energy lanced out from the Legion dreadnoughts. Unlike the conventional weapons, these didn't feed the Void Hunters. They disrupted their ability to process absorbed energy. The biometallic hulls began to fluctuate, their dark energy fields wavering. "It's working," Brooks shouted. "Their power absorption is decreasing." Morrison smiled grimly. "All ships target the temporal distortions. Pour everything into those weak points." The Legion fleet struck like a hammer blow. Ships that had survived black holes and quantum storms smashed into the Void Hunters' weakened hulls. The impact sent shockwaves through space itself. But the cost was enormous. Half the Legion fleet was destroyed in the collision, their crews choosing death over defeat. The surviving ships, including the Iron Resolve, emerged from the wreckage battered but functional. "Status report," Morrison called out, his voice hoarse. 2 Void Hunter ships are severely damaged, Hayes reported. But the third one, it's adapting, learning from our attack. On the display, the surviving Void Hunter ship was already regenerating, its biometallic hull shifting and changing. Worse, it was heading directly for Earth, moving faster than before. "Jake," Captain Reed's voice was grim, "we hurt them, but we didn't stop them. And now they're angry." The final gambit. Earth hung before them like a blue marble against the cosmic dark, but the approaching Void Hunter ship cast a shadow that seemed to devour light itself. The creature. For Morrison now understood these weren't just ships but living entities, had learned from their first encounter. Its biometallic hull rippled with new adaptations, energy-resistant nodules that pulsed with malevolent intelligence. "Fleet status," Morrison commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. 6,000 ships remaining, Lieutenant Brooks reported. "Most are running on backup power. The Void Hunter's presence is draining our energy cores even at this distance." The surviving Legion commanders appeared on the holographic display, their faces grim but determined. These were people who had stared death in the face on 100 different worlds and lived to tell about it. "Jake," Captain Reed spoke first, "my engineering team has an idea. It's completely insane, but it might work." "I'm listening." "We've been thinking about this wrong. These things feed on energy, all kinds of energy. Matter, antimatter, even quantum fluctuations. But there's one type of energy they can't process." Morrison raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "Life force itself. The bioelectric energy that powers consciousness. On Psy-World, we encountered entities that fed on thought patterns. The only way to fight them was to overwhelm them with pure human will." Commander Blake from the Prometheus nodded grimly. "She's right. I've been analyzing the Void Hunters' neural patterns. They're ancient, probably billions of years old, but they're not truly alive. They're parasites that have forgotten what real life feels like." Admiral Walsh's voice crackled over the communication system from Earth. "Captain Morrison, we're detecting massive energy buildup in the approaching ship. It's preparing to begin planetary consumption. You have maybe 20 minutes before it reaches optimal harvesting distance." Morrison looked at his crew. Hayes at tactical, his face scarred from the crystal wars of Shard Prime. Brooks at communications, who had survived the sound storms of Echo 7. These weren't just soldiers, they were humanity's most stubborn survivors. "What exactly are you proposing?" Morrison asked. Captain Torres from the Death's Edge answered. "We link every ship's neural network, Every human consciousness in the fleet focuses on one thing: the absolute refusal to die. Not just survival instinct, but the kind of defiant rage that made us human. The psychic feedback could kill us all, Blake warned. Human minds weren't designed to network at this scale. Morrison considered the option. 6,000 ships, each crewed by people who had already died a dozen times over on worlds that shouldn't support life. People who had learned to survive through sheer bloody-minded determination. Emma, open a channel to all ships. The communication system activated, connecting every surviving Legion vessel. 2 million voices capable of speaking at once. 2 million minds forged in the fires of impossible worlds. Brothers and sisters, Morrison began, we've fought things that shouldn't exist on worlds that shouldn't support life. We've been called monsters, outcasts, too dangerous for civilized space. Today, we proved them right. He paused, looking at Earth through the view screen. Home. The world that had cast them out, but still held everyone they had once loved. This creature thinks it can consume our world because it's bigger, older, more powerful. It's wrong. Not because we're stronger, but because we're too stupid to know when we're beaten. Laughter rippled through the communication channels. These were people who understood dark humor, who had learned to laugh at death itself. Link your neural networks. Every ship, every mind, focused on one simple human truth. We don't quit. We don't surrender. We don't die easy. The process began immediately. Ship after ship activated their neural linking systems, technology originally designed for coordinating complex Deathworld operations. But instead of tactical data, they were sharing something far more primal: the human refusal to accept defeat. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The combined psychic energy of 2 million defiant human minds created a wave of pure determination that rippled through space itself. It wasn't measurable by conventional sensors, but it was real. The Void Hunter ship shuddered. It's working. Brooks shouted over the psychic feedback. The creature is recoiling. On the tactical display, the massive bioship was indeed pulling back, its hull rippling with what could only be described as confusion. For billions of years, it had consumed worlds populated by species that eventually accepted their fate. But humans were different. Humans were the species that had looked at worlds covered in acid rain and decided to build cities there. That had colonized planets where the gravity could crush bones and called it home. That had faced extinction 1,000 times and always found a way to survive. All ships, advance. Morrison commanded. Show this thing what happens when it threatens our home. The Legion fleet surged forward, their crews linked in a network of pure human stubbornness, ready for the final confrontation. The Deathworld Gambit. The final battle began not with weapons, but with the raw force of human consciousness itself. 2 million minds linked in a network of pure defiance created something the Void Hunter had never encountered in its billion-year existence, a species that grew stronger when faced with extinction. Captain Morrison felt the psychic link burning through his mind like liquid fire. Every thought, every memory of survival against impossible odds, flowed between the Legion ships. The crew of the Iron Resolve was no longer just 47 individuals. They were part of something vast and unstoppable. Energy readings are fluctuating wildly, Sergeant Hayes reported, his voice strained from the neural feedback. The Void Hunter is trying to drain us, but it can't process what we're feeding it. The massive bioship writhed in space, its hull rippling with patterns of confusion and pain. For eons, it had consumed civilizations by overwhelming them with despair. But the Legion's psychic network was feeding it something else entirely, the memory of every impossible victory, every moment when humans had looked death in the face and laughed. Jake, Captain Reed's voice came through the link. I'm reading massive structural changes in the creature. It's trying to adapt, but human stubbornness isn't something you can evolve to counter. Morrison smiled grimly. The Legion had learned something on the Deathworlds that other species never understood. Sometimes the only way to survive was to be too unreasonable to die. The Void Hunter ship suddenly pulsed with dark energy and launched a desperate attack. Not the entropy weapons it had used before, but something far more primal, a wave of pure existential dread meant to convince its enemies that resistance was futile. It washed over the Legion fleet like a tide of darkness. Lesser species would have surrendered immediately, overwhelmed by the cosmic horror of their situation. But these were people who had faced down plasma storms on reactor worlds and called it Tuesday. "Is that all?" Captain Torres laughed over the communication system. I felt worse homesickness leaving Acid Rain 7. The psychic network amplified the laughter, turning it into something that resonated through space itself. The Void Hunter's attack faltered, its ancient mind unable to comprehend a species that could find humor in hopelessness. "All ships, final gambit," Morrison commanded. "Ram formation, but this time we're not just hitting it with metal and explosives." The Legion fleet reformed into a massive spear, but now each ship was surrounded by a corona of psychic energy, the collective will of humanity's most stubborn survivors. They accelerated toward the Void Hunter at speeds that would have been suicidal for any other species. "Admiral Walsh," Morrison called to Earth, "you might want to evacuate the orbital stations. This is going to be messy." The Void Hunter tried to drain their energy as they approached, but the psychic network was feeding it something it couldn't process, the memory of 2 million people who had chosen to live on worlds that wanted them dead. Every near-death experience, every moment of triumph against impossible odds, every time someone had said, "I'll die before I quit," and meant it. The creature began to convulse, its biometallic hull cracking as it tried to contain forces it had never encountered. This wasn't just energy or matter. This was the essence of what made humans human. "Impact in 10 seconds, Hayes reported. "All ships, prepare for." The collision was like two universes meeting. The Legion fleet struck the Void Hunter with everything they had, not just their ships and weapons, but their memories, their experiences, their absolute refusal to accept defeat. The psychic explosion could be felt across the solar system. The Void Hunter's ancient mind, unused to prey that fought back with such unreasonable determination, simply couldn't cope. Its bioship began to unravel, not from physical damage, but from conceptual overload. Morrison watched through the viewscreen as the massive creature literally fell apart, its hull dissolving into component atoms. The other two Void Hunter ships, sensing their companions' destruction, fled into hyperspace rather than face the same fate. "Fleet status," Morrison called out, his voice hoarse from the psychic strain. 60% casualties, Brooks reported, tears streaming down her face. "But we did it, sir. We actually did it." The neural network slowly disengaged, leaving behind a profound silence. Nearly 4,000 ships had been lost, but Earth remained. The Legion had paid its price in full. Admiral Walsh's voice came through the communication system, choked with emotion. "Captain Morrison, thank you. All of you. Earth owes you a debt we can never repay." Morrison looked at his surviving crew, at the stars beyond Earth, at the home they had saved through sheer bloody-minded determination. "Admiral," he said quietly, "we're not heroes. We're just too stubborn to know when we're supposed to die." The Legion fleet began its long journey back to the Outer Rim, carrying with them the knowledge that sometimes the only way to save civilization was to be too unreasonable to quit. The end.